we have some up front here. All right, we're missing some folks, but it is a holiday weekend. Like we used to say, we have people traveling, so it should balance out because people should be traveling here, so it should balance out. But usually we get on the short end of the stick. Uh, when churches usually talk about pastor or use the term pastor, who are they referring? Preacher. Preacher. What does the Bible, in the Bible, the term pastor refers to who? Or whom? Elders. Okay. So, today is National Pastor's Wife Day. So, we should include Rhonda along with Stacy, Lisa, and Jenna. So, since Stacy is the only one here, happy Pastor's Wife Day. So what do you call a nun who walks in her sleep? What do you call a nun who walks in her sleep? Sleepwalker.
Nonsense.
Huh?
Nonsense.
Nonsense? A Roman Catholic.
Oh, wow. Yeah, wow is right.
That sounds like Leroy.
Like what?
I know.
Why do skunks love Valentine's Day? This is from Dana Perino, Fox and Friends. Why do skunks love Valentine's Day? Because they're sentimental.
I like the first one.
And the average person spends 45 to 62 minutes a day doing what? 45 to 62 minutes doing what every day?
Using their flat iron.
Do what?
Using their flat iron.
Linking? Just waiting. You're close, Marie. Just waiting is the answer.
Just waiting.
Just waiting. So especially if you're on Highway 98. All right, today we're concluding our study of the Book of Ecclesiastes. Normally we would be beginning a new series of classes today, but I'll explain why we're not at the end of class and introduce you to the new classes for next quarter. Some of you, if you were in the family meeting the other day, you know why, but you'll find out. Just hang tight.
Okay.
For you visitors, what we do is we read our little introduction, then we read the scripture, and then we actually break it down and dissect and what we talked about, what we're talking about. So let's begin. Oh, by the way, if you have any questions, just either shout them out or raise your hand, and I'll try to call them in. So as Solomon reaches the conclusion of this book, he gives us a summary statement on his hard-lived and hard-learned life, fear God. At the root of all of living is the realization that God is sovereign, and that God will judge all that we do. Our lives, when lived for others or ourselves, are like vapor, they disappear. However, our souls pass from under the sun to beyond the sun, and we must live with eternity in mind. As he reaches the end of his discourse, Solomon uses the word goad in verse 11. A goad is a pointed or spiked stick that a shepherd or herdsman uses to jolt the sheep or cattle to keep them from falling off a cliff or running into some sort of hazard. Goads are painful but necessary, says Jeffrey Myers. Derek Kidner calls them teachings with a point. Our temptation is to always search for more, to interpret again, and to keep our mind and options open. However, Solomon's word to use in the end are that wisdom has been carefully dispensed to us, and we should listen. Any questions on the introduction? Just as a quick review of verses 1 through 8, since we're splitting the chapter, if you remember last week we talked about verses 1 through 6, talks about growing old, losing sight, your hair growing white, your hands trembling. Verse 7 talks about out of dust God made man's body, and of course that's where man's body will return, is dust. And then in verse 8, he summarizes those first 8 verses using the word, NIV uses the word meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Some translations will use the term vanity or vapor. So with that, who would like to read verses 9 through 14? Only 6 verses today, 9 through 14.
I'll read it.
Okay, Kevin?
Not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. Of making many books, there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Now all has been heard, and here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing whether it is good or evil.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. That word gold is actually, in pronouncing it, it's like spelling God, G-O-D, with a little g, with a long O, instead of a short O with God. It's a long O, so that's where we get the gold from. So that's how you pronounce that. The A is silent for you English people. So, anyway, English-speaking people. So, question number 1. In addition to being a wise man, what did the preacher continue to do, verse 9 and 10? What did God, Solomon, who is referred to as the preacher here, continue to do in verse 9 and 10?
To teach.
Teach, okay? Taught the people. What did he teach them?
Upright and true.
Okay, or knowledge. Some translations would say knowledge. What else did he do?
Ponder.
He pondered. What does pondering mean, Marie?
Sort of like meditate, but not
Okay.
really. That's what I think.
Just sort of think about it?
Yeah, which you have to do with things like
Yeah, yeah.
that.
So what did he ponder?
How to confuse us when he wrote it all down.
He pondered and thought out and then did something else. What did he do?
So no problems.
Yeah, set in order many proverbs. And as we've talked about, the book of Ecclesiastes is basically poetry. And what do we consider proverbs? Psalms and proverbs. Poetry, more poetry. And who wrote proverbs?
Solomon.
Huh?
Solomon.
Solomon. So here he's just kind of continuing the thoughts sometimes. And then he did a third thing. What was the third thing he did? 9 and 10? Do what?
Searched.
He sought to find acceptable and upright words or words of truth. So, any questions or comments? And some NIV actually says delightful words. Looking for trying to find delightful words. So what are the words of the wise and scholarly like? Verse 11.
Firmly embedded nails.
Okay. Goads and well-driven nails.
Almost sounds like torture.
In a way, yeah, that sounds like it. So 3 and 4 kind of go together. They both come from verse 12. From what did the preacher warn his son first? What did he warn his son about?
Adding anything.
Okay, adding anything. And then what 2 things should one keep in mind? What 2 things should we keep in mind? The latter part of verse 12. Okay, there's no end to the making of many books. And what else? All right, much study is weary. Some translations say wearisome to the flesh. So he warns his son, don't go beyond what's already written, and be careful. There's no end to making books, and much study is wearisome. So in what way is excessive devotion to books?
Well, now, wait a minute. Does that mean we're not supposed to have commentaries?
I just want to ask, because it seems like he just said, be warned about adding to them, and then he says, for the making of many books, there's no end.
What is the to them he's referring that he should not add to? Do what?
His collective.
If you add to something, there's no end to just keep adding
You
and
can't just
adding.
keep adding and adding and adding. John?
Does that mean librarians are bad people? Not all of them.
Not if you're married.
Maybe
one.
authors. Authors.
Yeah. He may may need someone to go home with this afternoon.
Good luck.
I bet he wish Janice was back in Memphis right now.
Okay, so what is he talking about, not adding words? Is it talking about, like he said, that, you know, if you start adding words, you can't just keep going and going and going? And basically then you start rambling, I guess we could say.
I think there's kind of a subtle point of God is, this is the way it is.
Yeah,
And
that's how I read it.
based
Yeah.
on culture, we can't just be changing these things for convenience and adding and removing and carting away the things we want and don't want to the collection.
That's how I interpreted it, yeah,
It's a pretty deep underlying
yeah,
topic in there.
yeah.
Is he
And
talking?
we just have to have the faith that what it is.
Is he talking about adding to and from the Bible?
That's one thing he's talking about.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's-
God's word.
That's how I was doing it.
Yeah, God's word, yeah.
Okay.
Well, it said 3 times, in the beginning of the Bible, middle of the Bible, the end of it, don't add to it.
Exactly.
Don't take
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. And we sometimes want to do that though, don't we? We don't like how something is said, so we won't change it, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, the thought that came to my mind, there's a lot of books written on Christian subjects. And we actually looked at a few here, I think.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of good that can be gained from that. There's also a danger
mhm,
of accepting everything that's said in the books,
mhm,
or the conclusions they come to.
mhm.
So I think, I don't know, I mean, he says, making many books, there's no end, much study wearies the body, but the verse before that says, be warned not to add to.
And two, yeah,
So I just think we can learn a lot from these extracurricular books.
well,
We
yeah,
just gotta be careful,
yeah,
to separate opinion from fact.
yeah, we have, yeah. There's a lot of good books written, and, I'm fixing to kind of start something here, possibly start something here. I've been in churches where we didn't study anything in Sunday school other than Church of Christ authors or either straight from the Bible. And there's good with that, don't get me wrong. But there are a lot of good books, like Kevin says, not written by Church of Christ people who are good, but you have to weed through some of it. I mean, you just have to do it and be aware that it's that way, David.
Yeah, right on that. I was just thinking, our Tuesday night men's group that we go through a book, and sometimes it's not a book we completely agree with, and I really appreciate when someone in the group speaks up and says, you know, this chapter really just
Yeah,
is not for me.
yeah,
I'm not sure about that, because we can analyze, but you know, what's interesting is, God can use all things to work together for good. It does not matter. And it blows my mind when someone says, well, God doesn't use bad people. I don't know. He used Pilate.
mhm,
He used a lot of it.
He used a lot of bad people through history. He used Pharaoh. He used, I mean, you can go
Yeah.
on and on with as many bad people that God used as good people. And so, and bad events as well as good events that God used to work together for good.
yeah,
And like David said today, you know, are we complaining? That was my favorite point. Are we whining and complaining so much that we don't see the miracle?
yeah.
I listen.
Well, you can't see the forest for the trees, David.
Yeah, anyway.
So, see, David, he was paying attention.
I was. Well, I had to. I was doing the slides.
Oh, okay. I was at least taking notes. I have to pay attention when you take a note. So, yeah, you're right, you're right. Anybody else have a comment about that?
A lot of time, you know, by a lot of words, a lot of different denominations, a lot of opinions and all, you have to look at it, but you have to know the truth.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Like
But
the
a lot of
Bereans.
times you
Yeah.
get that, and when they make a statement, people make us think about it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we are set in our ways. We
Yeah.
don't look at it from a different perspective. And when they give that other perspective, practical, but also it puts you in a position where you can help someone else too. If you're talking to a person, they have this conversation, they could say something, well, why don't you look at it from this point of view? Because you could say something, saying the same thing, but Leroy could come and say it in a totally different way, and that person will understand what's happening.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there's only one thing in God's creation that's set in its ways, and that's a rock. And what does a rock eventually do? Fall apart. So if we're set in our ways, where are we going to end up?
Yeah, we need to be flexible.
So, number 5, in what way is excessive devotion to books wearying to the body? If it's commentaries, if it's religious books, if it's secular books, how can that be, if we're doing that too much, excessive devotion to books, wearying to the body, or you could say wearisome to the body?
Well, if we are so devoted 18 hours a day to studying those books, are we out doing what God commanded us to do and helping others and winning others to Christ?
Okay, that's one thing. We could be busy with busy work.
Yeah, it becomes busy work.
Yeah, busy work. Anything else? What else, Jim?
I'm a little confused.
Okay.
I didn't think they had books during this time. What's he referring to?
They had books.
They had books.
They had books.
Yes, they did have books. Books, bound books.
Scroll.
They had scrolls.
They had
too.
scrolls too.
Yes.
But I think the reference is the same, whether it's scroll or a bound book or e-book or whatever else. You can still put it that way.
E-book.
I read e-books. Nobody else read e-books?
We're laughing about
Did you say they had e-books?
back then.
No, I said it could be e-books. I've heard it said that you can be too smart to know what you believe in. You ever thought of that? You can be so indoctrinated, you can be so educated that you're actually confused about one thing, where you stand on things. So I think that's part of what he's talking about. We can read these books, and many of them are good, but like David says, if we don't put them into action, what are we doing? Any comments or thoughts? Okay, Marie.
So the first thing I thought when I first read about it, about wearying the body, I thought about going through, exam week in college and how my body was very
Damn,
weary.
we only did it one day.
Hole up in the room and eat nothing but a bag of M&Ms for weeks. Trying to cram everything in. Not very good for the body. But also that, and I'm like a big reader. I like librarians. But anyway. But that, like now, so what's very popular, people go and they listen to a podcast while they're walking or bicycling or walking. You see everybody doing that but if you're sitting reading, that's a pretty sedentary thing. And to me, these are just obvious things, but I think it would be that way with scroll.
Yeah.
Even more so, because it's not like, well, there are 10 copies you could get at the library and you could bring one home. No, you had to go there and you could just read it in the temple or whatever.
Yeah.
And anyway, and also just, during COVID, I know, especially at the beginning, we were shut down, it was so helpful to us to just get out and walk on the beach or ride bicycles or, and be, because it is wearying to the body to just sort of be too much. And sometimes the more you study something, the more you get confused. I don't know if anybody else has ever felt that.
That's what.
Yep. All right, number 6. What does the preacher offer as the conclusion to his speech for meaning? Verse 13. What is his conclusion? Fear God and keep his commandments. And why? Why should we do that? It's our whole duty of man. You say something different, Pat?
No.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. So Ecclesiastes was written almost 3,000 years ago. So what does it mean today to fear God and keep His commandments? What does that mean? See what, Bernard?
Same thing, it means the same thing as it did back then.
Exactly. And we talked about it earlier. Does this mean we're scared of it? We walk around trembling in fear? He's going to zap us, if we mess up? Huh? It's a healthy respect. Yeah. And it applies to us today just as it applied to them. 3,000 and how many years, David?
It says 3,000.
He's reading an equal.
He's pondering.
He's pondering.
What was the question again?
Never mind. Not important. My statement of verse number 7 was Ecclesiastes was written 3,000 years ago. I want you to 3,000 and how many years?
Oh.
It's not important.
3,000 is.
Yeah. It's not it'll be okay. Don't worry about it. All of us don't have OCD, so it's no big deal.
Yeah, I like how you proposed.
So number 8, why is it important to fear God and keep His commandments? Why is that important? To have that healthy respect.
You just said
Do what, Christy?
it. Well, you just said it, it's,
Yeah.
of course, that's,
That's part, I believe so, yeah. That's the beginning of the knowledge.
To me, it's, fear God is what he can do. What he not. I always fear what he could do. Yeah, I guess that's respect.
Was that a scared fear? I mean, are you saying you're scared?
No fear, but what he can do if,
Yeah.
you fear him in that. But what he can do, if you don't respect him and keep his commandments.
Yeah. I'm following what you're saying.
Okay, good. What you're Thank you.
Yeah, we respect what he has done, what he can do, and what he will do.
Yes.
And it shouldn't be a scared type of fear. But
You know, Jesus talked about in John 12, there's gonna be a judgment.
Yeah.
He said
Yeah.
I'm not gonna judge you, the word will.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
Yeah.
It is,
And we've just talked about number 9 is fear in the context of debilitating terror. It should not be. No, it should not be.
God is total love and perfect love has
right.
Correct. Correct. So any thoughts on Ecclesiastes, then part of chapter 12?
Surprisingly, it's right at 3,000 years.
Okay. Woo-hoo. I got one right.
Right on.
So in conclusion, the study of this great book ends, like all great poetic literature, Ecclesiastes is not a book to simply be analyzed. It's to be savored and soaked in. As we conclude, I would encourage you to return to the book as a whole again and again throughout life. The teacher, of course, of Solomon, sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of faith. That comes from verse 10. So as such, they should not be quickly read, processed, and moved beyond. Now, I'm going to play, or David's going to play the Bible Project video. Most of you are familiar with the Bible Project. It's kind of as a summation of the book. So if you can't see the screen, you may want to move over a little bit. So David, if you'll get that going.
Lynn.
Ma'am.
What does, I guess I forgot, what is the word Ecclesiastes? What does that mean? Where did we get that word for the title?
Let's watch the video. You want, David? Yeah, let's watch the video, because I can't remember if they say or not. And that was 16 weeks ago, so I don't remember.
The Book of Ecclesiastes. Its part of the Bible's wisdom literature, and it opens with this line. The words of Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now in Hebrew, the word Kohelet means someone who has gathered people together. And in this case, it's to learn, so it's often translated in English as teacher. And the teacher is said to be a son or a descendant of King David. And so there are different views about who this figure might have been. Many think that it refers to King Solomon, others to maybe one of the later kings of David's line, and still others think that it's actually a later Israelite teacher who has adopted a Solomon-like persona as a teaching aid. Whichever of these views is correct, the key thing is to recognize that the teacher is a character in the book and is different than the author of the book, who remains anonymous. So we do hear the teacher's voice for most of the book, but it's actually a different voice, the author, who introduces us to the teacher in the first sentence, and then at the end concludes the book by summarizing and evaluating everything the teacher just said. So the author is someone who wants us to hear all that the teacher has to say, and then help us process it and form our own conclusion. So what does the teacher have to say? Well, the author summarizes the teacher's basic message at the beginning and right at the end, and it's Hevel, Hevel. Everything is utterly Hevel. Now, most English Bibles translate this word Hevel as meaningless, but that doesn't quite capture the heart of the idea. In Hebrew, Hevel literally means vapor or smoke, and the teacher uses this word 38 times in the book as a metaphor to describe how life is, first of all, temporary or fleeting, like a wisp of smoke. But secondly, also how life is an enigma or a paradox. Like smoke, it appears solid, but when you try and grab onto it, there's nothing there. So there's so much beauty or goodness in the world, but just when you're enjoying it, tragedy strikes, and it all seems to blow away. Or we all have a strong sense of justice, but all of the time, bad things happen to good people. So life is constantly, it's unpredictable, it's unstable, or in the teacher's words, like chasing after the wind. Hevel. Now that's kind of a downer. So why is he saying all of this? The author's basic goal is to target all of the ways that we try to build meaning and purpose in our lives apart from God. And he lets the teacher deconstruct these. So the author thinks we spend most of our time investing energy and emotion in things that ultimately have no lasting meaning or significance. And he lets the teacher give us a hard lesson in reality. You can see this most clearly in the opening and closing poems, which focus first of all on time and then on death. So the teacher says, you can spend your whole life working and achieving because you think that makes your life meaningful. You should really stop and consider the march of time. For all of the human effort that takes place in the world, nothing really ever changes. So sure, we develop technology and we build nations that rise and fall, but go climb a mountain and see if it cares. It was there long before any of us, and it will be here long after. I mean, no one's even going to remember you or anything you did 100 years from now. But that mountain, it'll still be there. And the ocean will still be breaking on the beach, and the sun will still rise and set. And so time will eventually erase you and me and everything that we care about. And if that's not disheartening enough, the teacher also can't stop talking about death all the way through the book, but especially in this poem near the end. He says, death is the great equalizer, and it renders meaningless most of our daily activities. It devours the wise and the fool, the rich and the poor, no matter who you are, what you've done, good or bad, we're all going to die. And it's instant. So with these two ideas in mind, the teacher goes on to consider all the activities and false hopes that we invest our lives in to find meaning and significance, like wealth or career or social status or pleasure. So you think working hard is going to make life worth it? Think about the stress and the toll that that takes on you, all the anxiety and the sleepless nights. And by the time you actually earn some wealth, you're going to be too old to enjoy it anyway. And then by the time that you have to pass it on to someone, they may not even be someone who cares about anything that you did. Or maybe you think pleasure is going to make life worth it for you. Go for it. You know, live for your vacations, live for the weekend party. Monday always comes. Hevel, Hevel. Everything is utterly Hevel. So what does the teacher advocate then? That we become pure hedonists or relativists? Well, no, that would be Hevel too. The teacher acknowledges the ideas from Proverbs that living by wisdom and the fear of the Lord, that these have real advantages. On the whole, life will probably go better for you. See, but the problem is that even living by wisdom and the fear of the Lord, they're hevel too, because they don't guarantee a good life. Good people die tragically, and horrible people live long and prosper. There's just too many exceptions. And so even wisdom is hevel. Again, not meaningless, but an enigma. Wisdom doesn't work the way you think it should all the time. So what's the way forward in the midst of all this hevel? And here, paradoxically, the teacher discovers the key to the true enjoyment of life under the sun. It's accepting hevel. It's acknowledging that everything in your life is totally out of your control. About 6 different times at some of the bleakest moments in his monologue, the teacher talks about the gift of God, which is the enjoyment of simple, good things in life, like friendship, or family, a good meal, or a sunny day. You can't control these things. You're certainly not guaranteed them, but that's their beauty. When I come to adopt a posture of total trust in God, it frees me to simply enjoy my life as I actually experience it, not as I think it ought to be. Because even my expectations about what life ought to be are ultimately hevel. Hevel. Everything under the sun is utterly hevel. And so the teacher's words come to a close. Right here at the end, the author speaks up again, and he brings it all to a conclusion. He says, the teacher's words are very important for us to hear. He likens them to a shepherd's staff with a goad, a pointy end, which might hurt when it pokes you, but he says the teacher is trying to poke you to get you to move in the right direction, towards greater wisdom. The author then warns us that you can actually take the teacher's words too far, and you could spend your whole life buried in books trying to answer life's existential puzzles. Don't try, he says. You'll never get there. And so instead, the author offers his own conclusion, and it's this: fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of humans, for God will bring every deed into judgment, every hidden thing, whether good or evil. And so the author thinks it's good to let the teacher challenge your false hopes and remind you that time and death make most of life completely out of your control. But what gives life true meaning is the hope of God's judgment, the hope that one day God will clear away all of the hevel and bring true justice to our world. And it's that hope that should fuel a life of honesty and integrity before God, despite the fact that I remain puzzled by most of life's mysteries. And that's the wisdom of the book of Ecclesiastes.
Those are always good, in my opinion, kind of as a summary. Kind of brings it all back together, what we've been talking about for the last 16 weeks. Anybody have any questions or comments? I've given you the link to that if you want to go back and look at that again. Basically, what you're looking at bottom of your second page is the artwork, but I realize it's real small, so I just wanted to give it to you. But that's the link. You can go back and look at it.
Also, on those pages, you can actually download that poster and print it out in full size if you want it. The organization of these posters is just amazing. And they've got these videos, at least one of these videos for every single book of the Bible. And some books, they've got 2 or 3 of these videos. It's really amazing project they've been doing for years.
And they have expanded into topics like, I think there's one for like angels and the Holy Spirit and, different topics, not necessarily just books of the Bible, but their primary goal was books of the Bible, so they've expanded. So.
Their one on the Trinity is mind-altering.
Yeah. All right, next week, the new classes will begin. If you were in the family meeting, you heard a little bit of explanation of why we delayed that a week. That's because, as David mentioned earlier, they let Gary have the day off. He only works 1 day a week. I don't know what the deal is. So anyway, the official new quarter will officially begin next week. As many of you know, Gary will be speaking on the qualifications of elders, deacons, ministers, and David will follow up in class, will follow up to the sermon, so you can bounce questions off of David, and he will have every answer you ever want, right?
Yes.
If you want, he'll find it.
But anyway, of course, you will not normally be able to counteract what Gary says, but you will be able to counteract what David says, so anyway. Anyway, that will begin next week, September the 11th, 18th, well, the 11th will be elders, 18th will be deacons. David will be gone to September the 25th, and I will be teaching a class on church responsibilities to the church, responsibilities of the church to the elders, which I think is going to be an interesting class, but I've never been in a class like that before. And then October the 2nd, they'll finish ministers' roles in the church. Then beginning October 9th through the end of November, David will be teaching on modern day parables. So that will be the conclusion of the quarter. Wednesday night, Rob Falker will be teaching a class on Christian leadership. Now, this is not to be confused with church leadership, what Gary and David will be doing, but he's titled it Christian Leadership, and he's also subtitled it Servant Leader in the church, Servant Leaders in the church. So Rob will be teaching that for September, October, and November.
Just a side note
Yeah.
on that. If you haven't heard Rob teach,
Oh, man.
this guy thinks on a whole different level.
Yeah. He is
Because
really
of his
good.
work, he thinks on a level that you just can't comprehend.
Yeah.
And I've sat through more than a few of his classes, and every time you walk out of there with your head kind of floating in a different plane of intelligence.
Yeah,
Did you
he's
say we
he's
can't
good.
comprehend what he's gonna tell us?
What's that?
Did you just say we can't comprehend what he's gonna
Oh,
tell us?
no. And that's the neat thing.
He brings it down.
He teaches intelligence analysis on the top government levels.
Yeah.
And he teaches dumb guys. And he does it really well. He talks to people, I mean, you will understand everything he says.
He's got a lot of work to do based on some things I've been saying.
Okay.
Just come to class. John?
But the
Give a
government,
quick shout out to our preacher this morning. That's the best lesson on Zacchaeus I've ever.
Really? Yeah, it was very good. Very good, David. Concerning this class, if you've missed a week and didn't get the handout, there are some leftovers up here on the counter. Or either see me and I will email those to you. Just tell me which weeks you missed, and I'll be glad to email those to you. Also, David's recorded most of them, or probably all of them, and he can send you the link to that. What else do I need to say in closing?
So tell me again the word Ecclesiastes. I mean, is that, I haven't looked it up.
I'll have to go back to week 1 and look
I
at
think
it.
it has to do with a collection, or collection of wisdom, or
I don't.
something. I was looking it up myself. I can't remember.
I don't even remember. I'll make myself a note and I will be in touch with you the next day or so.
Thank you.
Translated as
Because I know if
It's
I,
in the books.
do what, Bernard?
It's translated as teacher of gatherer.
Okay,
Also,
gather her. I will go back to week 1 and see what I have. Bernard?
I just lost my last great aunt from COVID. That's why I still wear this. Because her great niece caught it, her daughter caught it, she caught it, and people talk about, and I don't want to go there, but people talk about different things because her brother, who was my godfather, died from COVID.
Because you've lost several members from
Several
members from COVID. Yeah,
because of COVID.
yeah,
So, it's not a joking matter.
yeah,
When somebody say something like that, it hurts my
yeah.
heart. Because I've lost too many people. I have a lot of people in my family who has caught
Yeah.
COVID. So,
we're sorry to hear that, and most of it, I think, do fully understand why you still wear masks. Both of you still wear masks. All right, David?
One thing I failed to mention this morning is we are still collecting monies for the dorm in India. And we had kind of set a 3-week goal. Now, I believe we have around 5,000 right now.
Yeah. Is that counting today?
No.
I was gonna say, last week it was a little over 4.
Don't, have not counted yet.
Okay.
So we'll update that, but we were hoping to reach our goal of 16,000 by next Sunday. So I will get with Jill to maybe send out a friendly reminder this week so everyone can pray on it, think on it, reach down deep, maybe reach out to your friends that may have a charitable contribution, that they're looking to find, and maybe we'll hit our goal next Sunday.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
Great to have James here with us today.
Yes, James.
All right, thank you for your comments, your attention. Have a great week, be safe, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, that's good.